it's a bit of a random one, but it is sort of 75th or the 75th anniversary of the NHS. We're doing quite a lot as a museum around that, so it's sort of quite poignant for us as a museum. But there's a lot of ties with Sheffield, and there's a lot of things that we've noticed that are coming out now as new technology and never been done before. And actually, it's not. It's everything goes round in a big circle. So it may be quite a fast talk, but and it must tell me to slow down if needs be. So completely random one, but starting with the Great Fire of London. We just said NHS to start with. Completely wrong era, completely wrong everything. It's one thing we're constantly trying to push in regards to the Great Fire of London, that everyone looks at it from there was a massive fire in London, and actually no one looks at the looting side of it. Where did everyone go from medical? What about the sort of the salvage side of the Great Fire? And to be honest, throughout history, the Great Fire of London saw the largest temporary hospital ever created. Opposite the Thames, just a mass of any homes, any buildings that were left, tents, absolutely anything popped up to literally make a massive on-site hospital. So going back through history, you can look right back at 1666 and find your first major incident, major hospital. And I think, again, a nice one with the Great Fire of London is 1666 is what everyone talks about. But actually, there was a Great Fire of London of 1212 that was before it that, to be honest, saw exactly the same massive medical positions put in place. And in theory, everybody being thrown on anything to get away from the incident. So the whole thing is via pictures. I'm sure I always prefer talking to either pictures or objects, but the ambulance service itself doesn't really fall in line with the NHS's 75th anniversary, from the fact that it's always been a bit of an oddball throughout its entire life. But hopefully I can touch on that a little bit going through this presentation. Looks like in the picture there, it's again going back to armies and soldiers. They would have just used anything. Once the equipment would have been on site, any injured soldiers, all the carts and everything were just there, sat empty. So getting people, again, away from the incident goes back to the grab and go days of what an ambulance would have been, just the physical object to move people as quick as they could to where they're going. Hearse, fantastic little story around hearses, so to speak, but in the work we've been doing to try and look at the story of the ambulance service, how it in its own right developed, there's a lot of newspaper reports and a lot of information around the fact that the person is ill. You don't want them travelling through the city because all they're doing is spreading whatever they've got throughout their city. You don't really want them to move. Be really blunt, and it's in quite a lot of newspapers. Just die where you are and stay. Please don't spread this around. So actually, hearse were one of the first ambulances to ever be used, and there is records of newspaper reporters and locals literally saying, there was no funerals planned today. Why is there a hearse driving through our town and our city? And virtually, you can get a body in it. So why not? Why not transport somebody? And to be honest, do you already think they're passed away? So therefore, they're able to get to medical assistance as soon as they possibly can. And when I say about that side of it, is early actual ambulances. It physically is known that people would throw sticks and stones into the middle of the roads to literally cause the ambulance to crash, to stop it from continuing through its journey to save that patient. And there is a lot of incidents where, again, people have thrown things at the horses to get the horses to just stop and then physically just destroy the ambulance there and then. And again, we've got quite a few newspaper reports over this. That led quite nicely to a very special ambulance that we've got on display here. So the three people that's in the room will have walked past it when they came into the museum. But we have a horse-drawn ambulance on display here from Barnsley, and it looks very much like a taxi cab of the time, so to speak. It was quite a good invention from the fact of we need ambulances, but what's the point to keep replacing ambulances when they're just getting destroyed, they're not getting anywhere, drivers don't want to really drive them. So get yourself a taxi and convert it that a patient can lay down in it. So literally dig out the seat underneath where the driver would sit, and you can lay a patient hidden, in theory, in a taxi cab. So going back to the early 1800s, late 1800s, you were having to think to get someone to safety to save your loved one, you were having to hide them in something rather than just get the ambulance as you would do today. Um, Ambulance number two is there. That is our, in fact, actually, that's based in our building, so it's based in our cobbled yard downstairs. Fantastic picture for me from the fact that it is ambulance number two, but it's the city's first ambulance. There's a little bit of a rivalry going on when this building itself was in operation from the fact that this was the second fire station in Sheffield, even though it was fire, police and ambulance. Rockingham Street was station number one, the main station. So this building had majority of the first, but there was always called the second from the fact that Rockingham Street was the one that wanted the first of everything. But this building itself was physically developed more than Rockingham Street was at the time. So again, two police firefighters you see there doing the job of an ambulance operator. So it pulls all the services back into one. And again, it's the fire horses that are pulling the ambulance that would have been stationed here. Jumping completely modern and away from this, we're going to jump massively throughout a timeline here. But again, it comes back to my this is not new. This has happened before. And you can see on the screen there, this is the country's first ever 100% electric fire engine. Fire engine, ambulance. That's bad in this sound. 2020, West Midlands Ambulance Service did a massive celebration. They was praised by everybody for having the first electric ambulance. It can do 100 miles. It takes 4 hours to charge up. A lot of paramedics these days will say it's quite easy. You just charge up while you're waiting to get into A&E. There's nice correspondence going on at the minute around the 100% electric vehicle side of things. But to be honest, they're about 100 years late to the party. 1913, London or City of London's police ambulance service in a 100% electric vehicle just there. Would have charged up in the station, would have been able to go, just a grab and go, not all the technology that's in them today, but still a 100% electric fire engine ambulance. So again, you are about 100 years late to this party. Celebrated, but therefore everything has come back round now. When you look through the reports of the first electric emergency vehicles, we'll say, the answer always came of why go electric when it takes fuel to make the electric? So should we not just use fuel to power the thing in the first place? There's lots of sort of correspondence around that as well. But to be honest, absolutely loved by the police force. The only thing is it caused a lot of accidents within itself, and the fact that it's a very quiet vehicle compared to the cliffety clop of a horse and a really rackety vehicle sort of getting pulled to an incident. Horses, obviously, horses had to pull the first horse-drawn ambulances, and again, we're still not really touching on the story of the NHS because the story of the NHS at the minute is coming quite late. It's a very new part of our emergency services as we see it today. But one of the reasons why I've put the horses on the screen there, that's a scene from World War One, pulling a wagon with the horses. But one of the main things to look after is them horses as well. So the RSPCA, who are not known for being an emergency service, have always been there. They technically are the oldest uniformed service apart from military, from an emergency point of view. During the First World War, they supplied 3 motor lorries to be used by any of the services to get anything anywhere. 30 corn crushers to literally make the food for the horses. 50,000 books with first aid information on veterinary first aid. But to be honest, they got their books out before medical itself, from a human point of view, was actually given to the front line. So to be honest, if it works on a horse, why can't it work on a soldier? That was the idea of it in the time. Following on from that, 100 tons of medicine. Again, just give a smaller dose. A human has 2 legs, it's got a head, it's roughly the same as a horse, just give it a little bit less. And to be honest, at the time, nobody thought anything. Everyone just cracked on and, hey, we have some sort of medicine here, let's, like you said, give it a less dose and work his way through it. And I think one of the, especially from a children's point of view, when we're going through anything at the minute for education, 4,000 skips simply to get rid of the horse's poo. But maybe the fact that, again, it sounds like a daft thing, or sounds like, crikey, that's a lot of just skips for poo. What's that got anything to do with medical? Um, they're walking in the trenches that are full of the horse's poo. You get it out, keep it as hygienic as you possibly can. And 50 horse ambulances, so horse-drawn horse ambulances, but physically given over to the front line. Do you know what? If a horse fits in here, a stretcher will fit in here. Pile them in, get them to wherever you possibly can. So again, World War One photo. Take a good look at it. Imagine the whole trench full of poo. It's not actually, when we go back to the original statement, it's you're trying to keep them trenches as clean as possible. Trying to get people again to safety as much as possible. And to be honest, in most trenches, there was more medical staff than there were soldiers physically in the trench at some points. Again, there's quite a lot of photos about this, but early motorised ambulances, again, out on the front line, and then the horses just trotting up in front, having no issues whatsoever. Does it come back to the thing, is motorised better than horse-drawn? That's a completely different talk in a whole different setting. And again, when you're on the front line, where do you get them from? The ambulance service over time have literally used everything. So there's a photo there of hospital trains. They would have literally just been stacked out with beds, bunk bed style. Again, get the people from the front line, get them back here. And going back to a Sheffield point, we've got records from the Second World War of in mass hospital trains arriving at the railway stations. The firefighters and the police officers that were based in this station, and any members of the public, just getting the soldiers that were coming back from the front line straight into through and as good as possible medical care. Staying with the military side of it, and we just said then the ambulance service literally do use everything. Obviously, frontline, they no longer use horses and horse drones, but we still have fully armoured hospital vehicles that are literally, again, just used as grab and go. They're still not really there for dealing with somebody there and then and their injuries. They are designed to get somebody away from that front line back to the field hospitals, where they can get them as soon as, or get them fixed up as soon as possible. Going to the 1920s, again, one of my favourite vehicles and my favourite parts of the ambulance service, so to speak, but that's London's MAB, so it's the Metropolitan Asylum Board. I think this has got quite a close story for me, from the fact that when you start going back through history and looking at records, we had Asylum Board fire brigades, we had asylums themselves, we had Asylum Board ambulances. When I say it's sort of close to my heart in one way, if you are today dyslexic or just gone from my head completely, autistic, you would be in an asylum. You'd be in the back of one of these ambulances, you'd be getting taken away, you'd be locked up, you'd be in a padded cell. It's just massively proves, I think, the difference and how the world has changed. And again, when you look at medical side of things, the things we've just spoke about then have always been around. They've just been treated completely different. So I think where a lot of people comment saying, "Oh God, it's a new thing. It's just another thing that's getting called something." Actually, it's always been there. It's the things that are now just being diagnosed and from a medical and an NHS point of view, able to actually deal with a lot better going forward. Onto the NHS. So, 5th of July 1948, the NHS itself started. A fantastic idea. Let's provide a national health service, completely free, gives everyone the option of a health service. And to be honest, doing some community engagement work recently with Yorkshire Ambulance Service, we should be very grateful in this country for a national health service, because with Sheffield, we get a lot of students, as everyone's aware. It's the only thing that's getting built at the minute is student accommodation. But you would genuinely be surprised how many students hurt themselves that are coming from overseas and just won't go into hospital. They don't want to ring 999. They would rather try and put up with whatever's happening, just from the simple fact of they don't have the money to pay for it. They don't have them. They know it's going to cost when they get there. And again, I think that comes down to education in one way, but I personally think we should be proud of our actual health service, what we've got now. You're also looking at the NHS starting not far after the Second World War had finished. So a lot of things were still in place. So we've still got civil defence running majority of the ambulance services, because obviously we've got the new threat now of nuclear war going into a different thing. So it's the NHS didn't take over and just replace everything else. Ambulance drivers were paid £4 and 4 shillings for a 48-hour shift when the ambulance service first started officially at the same time as the NHS. And again, not too long after the NHS started, 1951, the NHS had a budget. And it literally was in there, the National Health Service, everyone is going to it, everyone is using, the entire country is losing out. I'll tell you what, let's start charging for prescriptions, let's cut funding from the NHS. So it's not, funding cuts are not a new thing, they've been around since something has even been started, so to speak. The 1960s saw training being put in place. So again, let's try not to do the grab and go ambulance service. Let's try and treat a patient on the scene. Let's actually get within the NHS itself. Let's start training our nurses. Following on from the civil defence itself, actually they had fantastic training schools, training centres, and the NHS started to employ a lot of the ex-civil defence or volunteers, simply from the fact that the civil defence was doing a better job than the NHS in its training side to start with. In the 1960s, it also saw the Miller Report being created. So that meant that, for example, every single firefighter had to wear a symbol on their arm that literally said, we have been trained up to an NHS standard for admitting first aid. And however you want to look at it, in 1961, birth control became part of the NHS as they started to look at everything on a much wider basis, from the fact that the NHS was started on the sort of basics of, let's just provide a health service. Let's not bother looking too deeply into what this health service actually does mean and what the services we do need to provide. 1974, the ambulance service actually became under the NHS then, so it moved away. So, for example, within South Yorkshire, moved away from town and city ambulance services into what would have been then the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Ambulance Service, and became part of the NHS. And in 1971, the first 6 fully qualified paramedics started on the actual ambulance service as well. So this is when we start to see, again, like I said, then more than just the grab and go, and more into I really think we should train these guys up, let them try and resolve a lot of the issues at the when they first get to the scene, not losing critical time, wasting people. Looking at that critical time, the number 999 first were used in 1937. Sorry, it only actually became direct into the ambulance service in 1976, and then was made able to be accessed via a mobile device in 1986. So that sort of needing to get the ambulance there as quick as possible, and same as A&E and the hospitals itself, when you actually arrive there, you've got that. Everything has a timescale to it. So to say that 999 started in 1937 and it took till 1976 to actually get 999 utilised for the ambulance service, it's slow within our thinking as well. Extremely famous photo. One thing that sort of does always have a question in my mind, and I think when we've always been doing research, we know how much the ambulance service meant to the Queen, and we know how much she put into that service, from the fact of literally fixing the vehicles, the whole lot of it. But the ambulance service itself only became Crown recognised and Royal approved in 1985. So it took quite a long time to actually get not just the NHS, but the ambulance service that was acknowledged within the NHS now, but also actually recognised in theory as an emergency service, because it wasn't realistically an emergency service prior to that. 1989 saw, and technically, our first strike. So it was the ambulance service went to work to rule. that is, if anybody doesn't know what work to rule is, it literally is whatever your contract physically states. If it says 9 to 5, you shut off at 5 o'clock. You start at 9. If you get an hour's dinner, you get an hour's dinner. If you've got a patient on board your ambulance, park somewhere. And to be honest, so strikes are not a new thing. They're still happening now. And I think the biggest thing within a strike in emergency service at the minute is you are putting yourself, and I mentioned the word frontline quite a bit, but you are putting yourself on the front line constantly. We all know that ambulances do get stoned and bricked still in certain parts of the country. And again, I've just been to a conference and seen an ambulance that's been brought back to preserve from Ukraine that is completely bullet hole, shot and sort of half blown up. These are people that are putting their lives on risk to help you. And right here, right now, you can get a job in Tesco's and technically being paid more shelf stacking than you can for being a frontline ambulance operator. The 1990s saw the fact of having to get patients quicker and realising again these timescales for getting the patient to the hospital as quick as we can. So 1991, Cornwall started our very first ever air ambulance service as officially an air ambulance. And bringing it straight back to Sheffield, Lodgemore Hospital in the late 60s had our first medical rescue. So using a military helicopter to transfer a patient up to Sheffield for critical care. Again, that part's just outside Lodgemore Hospital. I would say about jumping back and forth, we've looked at tanks, we've looked at trains, we've looked at horse parts, we've looked at pedal bikes now. Again, London, we're going to put police officers, ambulance staff, paramedics, train on pedal bikes, get through all the traffic in London, try and get to everywhere, anywhere, and we've had it trialled here in Yorkshire as well. But again, not really a new thing. World War One, World War Two, into the 80s, into the 90s, some of the smaller villages, you still had a doctor, a nurse coming on a pedal bike to you. It is not a new thing. Everything does come round. So before I go into the next stage, it's a little bit again we've done a lot of research into this, and it's developed the emergency services quite massively over the years. But the uniform you can see on the screen there belongs to a HEMS pilot, so an air ambulance pilot, paramedic, sorry, called Lee Parker. Lee lives in Sheffield, but worked up until quite recently on the London helicopter. And Lee was the first air ambulance paramedic to land 477 for the London bombings. So we've managed to get recently all of Lee's stories, sat for a couple of hours recording Lee, getting all of his information. And it's now part of our brand new air ambulance exhibition that's just opened in the museum. But again, I think listening to Lee about his time through the service, and he sort of said as well, is everything we're talking about, it comes around. It comes around even when people are employed and still within that service. But staying with the sort of 7-7 theme in theory, September 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers came down. It's not something to explain, I don't think, to what everybody should know the incident. But it was one of the biggest changes in our emergency services since, going right back to the start, since the Great Fire of London. It saw specialist rescue teams be created. It saw things like tourniquets for major bleeding being put into general first aid kits. It's seen a lot of things change within our emergency services and the hospitals itself. And leads straight into the fact that we definitely aren't grab and go anymore. Ambulances are literally mobile NHS hospitals. You don't need to be at a hospital anymore to have a lot of the issues dealt with for what the grab and go 60s hospital ambulances would have been. And then again, following on from the September 11 attacks, the ambulance service created a team called HART. It's the Hazardous Area Response Team. So it's extremely specialist trained ambulance staff and paramedics, doctors, that, again, going back to that, there's a time scale that people need to be seen within. A lot of the time, the ambulances, even though they are kitted ready to grab people, they're still sat at the side of an incident waiting because the fire service, the police, trying to deal with the incident, trying to rescue that patient, and it's their job to just get them out and get them to the ambulance service. But actually, in major incidents, can we get the ambulance service straight in? Now, again, when we say about coming around in a big circle, we have to go right back again. It was September the 11th, 2001 that heart teams were created, and we need to look at ambulances being more than grab and go. And the picture that's on the screen now is a Sheffield ambulance behind Rockingham Street, Rockingham Street Fire Station, 1916. Annoyingly, you can't see it on the picture on the screen now, but just at the very, very top, you've got water rescue equipment. So there's a big life ring on the top of it. The boxes on the side is rope rescue equipment. Under the seats is bits of climbing equipment. So Sheffield, again, looking back through history, Sheffield one of the first to literally go, do ambulances need to be grab and go, or can we start doing specialist rescue? And mainly that was because at that time, the ambulance service was under the fire service and part of that service. Sammy is a very well-known paramedic with Yorkshire Air Ambulance, an amazing person, and lives in Sheffield. People may have seen a lot of Sammy if you watch Helicopter ER or any of the helicopter-related incidents, as she seems to always be on duty when everything happens. She does constantly say that sometimes she thinks she is the unluckiest air ambulance paramedic. But Sammy's got quite a nice story. So if you look at inspirational women, for example, you try and look at actually who has been the longest serving air ambulance female. It's quite a nice story to tell. Forget about that. Sammy's been the longest air ambulance paramedic, end of. It's in service. So she has again amazing story to tell, and we're currently recording a lot of Sammy's stories. As she's not ready to retire in any way, shape, or form. She doesn't want to. She wants to stay in that role, and as she said, however many times she can constantly keep passing the test, she will continuously carry on with the job. Following on with the female theme, again, through time you've looked at females should be nurses, they should be in the hospitals, they shouldn't be taking doctors' positions. Should females be on the front line? Should females be driving the ambulances? Are we allowed to let a female loose behind blue lights and sirens? They're all questions that they're coming out of my mouth, but they're not questions I would ever ask. They're questions that public genuinely do ask, and they are recorded. You would be surprised how many freedom of information requests have gone in of I've just seen a female driving an ambulance. Should they be doing that? It's blue lights. There's lots of questions behind that, and to be honest, go right back to World War One, when everyone went to the front line. Females took up all the emergency roles. They are there, they are important, they're as important as everybody else. And it was in 2022, Yorkshire Ambulance Service became 51% female within its entire staffing team. And again, if you speak to Yorkshire Ambulance Service about that was never a planned thing. That was never I think we need females in X and Y roles. It was how the ambulance service happened. In theory, again, it's the best person for the job at the time, and that's how all the emergency services should be. Following on with the same sort of themes, and I want to touch a little bit, and apologies if this touches on anything that I probably shouldn't be speaking about within a heritage group, but we all speak, and I hear it constantly through all heritage groups, that we're not getting younger people involved, that newer people that are coming into the city are not, don't seem to want to be bothered about heritage. And to be honest, when we speak to a lot of people, they are, but they feel like they're not included within heritage. And to be honest, I think we as an organisation, whether it be Join Up Heritage or the whole lot of everyone that's members of Join Up Heritage, we will kill history ourselves if we don't actually allow younger people and newer people and diverse communities to join different organisations. And in saying that, it was one big thing that we wanted to do the other year, and we took one of our vintage ambulances, we took all its original livery off of it. We sticked it up, as you can see on the screen, with the National Ambulance LGBT Network stickers, and took it to York Pride. And to be honest, it was one of the most engaging events that we've ever been to. We flipped the story because at the end of the day, everyone calls pride, or calls pride gay pride. It's not. It's about being proud of who you are, what you are. And again, from a heritage point, it's about being proud of your city and everybody and anything that's in it. So it was quite nice because it really did open a completely different audience to us, um, and allowed us to tell a completely different story. And I think sometimes as heritage organisations, we don't look at that wider story because I have it in the bottom corner there, but and I've used this quite a few times now that it's discover the story, but it's their history we're discovering, and it's their history that we need to be talking about. And I think we've had comments before we joined the heritage where is it all about historic buildings, for example, isn't it? It's not all about historic buildings. The people that were in the buildings are as important. Um, and I think younger people that we're coming out to, so for example, Steph, who's on screen now, Steph is one of the first trans ambulance members of staff. And we bit the bullet and went into schools and did, don't get me wrong, this was probably one of the most worryingest things I've ever done in my life. But we got Steph to video call into an entire secondary school in an assembly. And we got the secondary school to openly ask questions to Steph. Now, Steph is a very important person to me. The fact that a couple of people physically have turned the ambulance down when Steph turned up, and literally just said, "Don't even bother coming into my house. Never mind anything else." And this is the thing that a lot of the frontline emergency services are going through at the minute, and it's when we say about it's the people's story as well. To a whole group of year 11 students, you can think within your own mind of the questions that would be asked by teenagers. And one child did stand up and ask a question that I won't repeat the question. And virtually they were booed out of the group with the rest of the school wanting to ask questions. We then asked anybody that was willing, even younger children, have you got questions for Steph? And to be honest, no questions came back from in regards to Steph transitioning, so to speak. The questions were, how fast did an ambulance go? The questions were, why did you pick red hair? And there were none. There were none about anything to do with the fact of would you turn Steph down if she turned up, for example. And I've purposely put these on for the fact that as an NHS worker and in hospitals, you deal with everything and anything. You have to put everything to one side, and it is a life-saving organisation. And going into life-saving organisation and things changing technology. When we do say things come around, certain things don't come around. So the final two things I've got here are defibs being delivered by drones. People think AI and drones are going to take over the world, but to be honest, if that thing can get me a defib in 30 seconds or a minute to an emergency, they're good technology. They just need tweaking and testing. And I think the biggest thing, and I always like to finish with this from an ambulance service story, but is what's next? Flying paramedics. That is not a full marketing picture. That is the Peak District. That genuinely is jetpacked paramedics that we're now putting into operational use. You may question it, but we have mountain rescue teams that could take a long time to get to you. If you get the chance, literally go on YouTube, go on and have a look at jetpack paramedics. And in theory, it's where your NHS is going next.